I think that there's changes that are inevitable, and there's a lot of confusion and fear looming because of that. The way I see it is the best way of preparing ourselves, no matter what happens, is just getting to the forefront of what's happening. I can start carving my own path, and perhaps being at the intersection of two disparate paths that are novel. You don't have to figure it out today or tomorrow, but just constantly course correct and affirm that to be true, and eventually you may end up exactly where you're meant to be.
Welcome to the Physician Pharmacist podcast, a show designed to shed some light on a very unusual pathway into medicine. I'm your host, Nathan Gartland, and I'm a licensed pharmacist and fourth-year medical student. I'm also the author of PharmD to MD and the owner of the Physician Pharmacist Company. As this podcast has grown, we've had the tremendous opportunity to broaden our scope and explore other non-traditional healthcare careers. Tune in to hear from our non-traditional experts serving at the frontier of medicine, technology, and innovation. In this episode, I have the privilege of speaking with Andrew Bouras, who is a first-year medical student at NOVA Southeastern University. Before medical school, he attended Virginia Tech, where he graduated with a bachelor's degree in clinical neuroscience in 2020. During his gap years, Andrew was able to build up his clinical acumen and invest his time into entrepreneurial interests by starting several of his own businesses. I'm excited to explore his journey today and hope you can learn more about what it takes to get into medical school. All right, Andrew, welcome to the show today. Happy to have you.
Excited to be here. Thank you.
Of course. And when you started at Virginia Tech, did you know for a fact that you wanted to go down the path of medicine, or it sounds like you were kind of feeling things out initially? I know your undergrad degree was in clinical neuroscience, but is that what you started out with?
Yeah, so I got accepted as the undecided major, but I realized after orientation that it really didn't make sense to go in as undecided because then I'd be playing catch up from there. And so it was really just like coming down to I had to make a decision sooner rather than later. And so then I started like kind of really trying to reflect on like what I'm interested in, and more so like what am I actually naturally more skilled in, I guess. So I would just think about the classes I was taking in high school. I knew I didn't really excel in math or really have a natural interest towards there. Same with writing. I more so just enjoyed, I'd say, science. And I didn't really know exactly what I wanted to do with a science background or degree. So I really just had to decide, do I want to do biology and learn more about like any kind of human part or like plants and animals, like all of life? Or do I want to be more specific and actually go towards like the human body and the mind and all of that with neuroscience? And so I ended up going with the clinical neuroscience, and they had different subsections of neuroscience. And looking back, I kind of wish I chose like the computational neuroscience, because that's where more of my interest is now. But at the time, that was too much math for me, so I just strayed away from that and went with just regular clinical neuroscience.
For sure. Yeah. It's funny with like the hindsight, I obviously went to pharmacy school before medical school, and looking back, it's like, at 18 years old, you don't really know anything. And it's so hard, like the pressure we put on these students these days to like make some like life altering career decision, especially with how much debt you end up going into with this process. So I feel for you in that sense. And I kind of I lived that similar life. So it's just kind of interesting to talk about that.
Yeah.
And so you're feeling things out. You kind of had some, looking back, you wish you had done more of this like computational. What do you mean exactly by that?
Well, I mean, we're going in a direction of a lot of innovation relating to like data analytics and just honestly collecting as much data as possible and then having improvements in what we can do with that data to gain some insights from it. And I think that there's a lot of skills that are more technical that I wasn't exposed to with my degree or the classes I was taking, that now I've had to almost play catch up in that sense of there's a lot of free resources online that you can learn programming, you can learn different softwares, etc. And that was offered with the tuition that I was paying at the time, but it was just on like the next track over that I just didn't have the opportunity to partake in.
Yeah, that's interesting too that you mentioned like the kind of direction of medicine. It's funny, the last podcast I just had, episode 37 with Lathan Liu. He was actually talking about, he got his epidemiology degree at Cambridge and obviously is in medical school at Mount Sinai. And he was talking about this exact same principle. I just think it's like funny how everyone's on the same page about this, and you either got to get on the train or, watch out because it's going to run you over. And it's really interesting to see where all of this like stuff is taking healthcare. And to be well versed in those particular things is really, really important these days. It's like one of those things you can't ignore, like you're saying. And so obviously you finished out your degree at Virginia Tech at that point, and you had some time in between starting medical school. So what did you do with that time exactly?
Well, just to take a step back, I mean, in terms of actually knowing I even wanted to go to medical school, that was a long step, a long process of like coming to terms with it. But ultimately, it was just trying to separate everything into different domains of all of that. So like there's like the teaching, there's the actual clinical experience, and there's the research. And after just having tried to gain all of those kind of experiences throughout undergrad, I realized that I was lacking a lot of the clinical experiences. I mean, I was able to be a scribe and whatnot during my like sophomore junior year, but if we want to become physicians, we want to be actually working with patients like face to face, even hands on, and that was something that I didn't really feel like I had a great opportunity to, especially with just shadowing every so often. It didn't even really like kind of scratch that itch. So I just honestly got the first clinical job that I was able to get after graduation, and that was in GI in a private practice. And it really just opened the door to so much that I never really anticipated. But yeah, so I got accepted to be first. It was the role title was clinical research coordinator, but they had me
Mhm.
start off as a medical assistant to just learn the EMR, the workflow, the employees I'm working with. And then from there, it opened the door to being the endo tech in the procedures, collecting the biopsies, and then the pathology tech, actually cutting the slices of the biopsies. And yeah, just honestly, just pretty much filled every role I could in that position besides being the doctor, pretty much.
Yeah, I think that's really cool that you were able to get this like really unique experience. Like you didn't just have like clinical exposure. Like I think a lot of the stuff people will come in with applications will say like, oh, like I had clinical exposure. Then you look at it, they were pushing people around or like talking to, handing out flyers at the front door. And
Yeah.
it sounds like you actually were in the ORs, in these, operative settings, in these clinic settings where you were actually participating in the clinical workflow. So I think that's really cool that it definitely probably helped bolster your application when it came to that. But also like just not from an application perspective, I think it probably like led to a lot of like growth when it came to like, wow, I really love medicine. Do you have
Yeah.
thoughts about that too?
Yeah, it definitely made me realize I enjoyed being in that kind of setting. I didn't feel like I was getting the whole perspective of what medicine really is. But I mean, in terms of those specific patients, it was amazing to be able to see them first come walk in the door as the medical assistant. I'd be like greeting them and taking their medical histories and all that. And then perhaps they were given a diagnosis and had to go take a procedure that I was the endotech for. I'd be collecting the biopsies from them, and then I'd be processing them, and then perhaps they would be qualified for a research trial, and then I would enroll them. So I really was at almost every stage along the journey, and that was something I never expected I'd get the opportunity to be a part of. So that was for sure worthwhile. But then towards the end, the last like 6 months or so when I was there, the private practice actually got bought out by like a larger conglomerate, and so I was leading some of the like the transition to be able to join that bigger group. And so that was more of a background into like the business side of what it takes to run a private practice and be with like health like workflows and whatnot. So that was the second slice of like the meaning that I gained from that experience, I'd say.
Yeah, of course. I mean, so much of healthcare is dictated by where the flow of the dollar goes. And, we focus so much on like being clinically, adept, which is obviously the most important feature of becoming a clinician. However, I think it would be I guess we need to make sure we pay attention to the financials as well, because that's going to dictate how policy works, how procedures are done, and how, the general function of the system works. And so I think that's really cool that you were able to get that experience. And it'd be like an interesting thought question. Like, I wonder if they have classes like that they offer to students who could, kind of get exposure to this, or almost like like an internship for a year. I think that would, kind of add a lot of value to students too.
Well, I know that at my school they've offered these meetings with like the business school, and they're trying to get us to do MBAs or what have you. And I just I struggle to feel like it's worth doing an online class where the incentive isn't really to learn. It's the incentive is to just pass the class so I can get the degree. But then what am I really paying all that money for? And then I think back to when I was working in that private practice, and like the founder of that private practice, he was saying like I started because I would check out these other practices in the area. I'd speak to the doctor that founded that one and realize that like they don't have anything special. They just kind of put the effort in. They figured it out as they went. And it was more of that active learning experience that I feel like is the same for business. I mean, of course, it's not a substitute for everything, but I think it has a time and a place, and that's kind of just where I'm at in my life right now.
Yeah, it's interesting too, because like I'm actually reading Atomic Habits right now. And so it's just like brought to mind like the concept of action versus motion. And
Mm,
where like what you're saying is you're talking about the actionable stage, which is where most of the actual learning occurs. We can sit there and be in motion in the sense that, oh, I'm going to research or I'm going to review what it takes to start a business. But actually going out there is going to be what actually leads to the learning that is like engraved into your mind. So
yeah.
it's just another interesting thought that kind of came across that. And so obviously you're in this position for X amount of time. How many years were you here?
Um, well, I was there for probably like 2.5 years or so.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Wow. And so then at what point did you think to yourself, okay, now I need to pursue medicine? This is like I need a change of pace, or were you thinking like, especially since the company had been bought out, like you mentioned,
Mhm.
were you thinking like, okay, this is just a natural transition for the next stage of my life?
Yeah, the physicians there would always tell us like, "Hey, this place is like a bus stop. Like, you don't want to be here forever. This is like you're here for a time to get to the next stage." And so there was a track of people that were in a similar position as me that would graduate from undergrad, apply to medical schools, and then peace out and go to school. So I was really just a part of the cog of the machine at that point. So there was a system set up to have the physicians there like really give any kind of guidance that I was willing to seek out. And so I knew from when I got the job that like, hey, I'm trying to go to medical school. I kind of set that up from day one. That, like, let's try to get any kind of experience that can help bolster me as an applicant for whatever school I'm going to try to go to. And so I ended up applying within that first year or two. And at the time I applied to only MD schools, I really didn't know much about the application process. I mean, I knew enough to submit on like the first day and try to get like a well-rounded application. But in terms of like the essays I was writing and the mindset I really had in trying to go to a school, I don't think I was like honestly like mature enough to really handle becoming a medical student. And so that second year around, I worked a lot like more one-on-one sessions with the physicians and them giving their perspectives of what helped them and what they would be looking for if they were on the other end of the admissions committee. And that ultimately, I think, helped me land several acceptances, all to osteopathic schools. So you could say it was probably just my MCAT at the end of the day. But yeah, that I definitely was trying from day one, but it took me a few years to get to where I am now.
For sure. I mean, it sounds like it also highlights the significance of the MCAT. That's something I do a lot of consultation for, where a lot of, pharmacists who are making this transition into medicine think that, oh, because I'm a pharmacist, I can go and sit down and take the MCAT. And that is a beast of a test. It doesn't translate very well.
Yeah.
So you have to be obviously very well prepared for that. And you also, it sounds like you did two application cycles. So I think that's pretty unique. Former guest who was on here, episode 19, Philip Burse, he I believe he took three application cycles before he was accepted. Now he's a dermatology resident. So,
Wow.
don't give up your dreams on any of that stuff. And for our listeners, as you might know, that's probably one of the most competitive specialties to get into. So
Yeah.
it just goes to show, obviously perseverance goes a long way, and look where you are now.
Yeah. 100%.
Absolutely. And kind of talking a little bit more about like the application process as a whole. You said you took the MCAT. Did you take that twice or
Nope. No,
took it once?
yeah, no, I could have considered taking it a second time, but I was so burnt out of like just studying for it and all that went into that at the time I honestly I was happy with my score. I mean, it's not like I scored above the 520 and all that. Like I was shot down by these schools, even though I should have been accepted. It was more of like I scored above the average. I was happy with what I had, and at that point, I was like, maybe it's just how I convey this in terms of the essays and the writing. But I mean,
Hmm.
in my head, like I said, it was good enough. I was happy with it. I didn't really need to try to get like a few points higher or anything like that.
What kind of like additional recommendations would you have for individuals who are going and reapplying at this stage of the game?
Um, I would definitely say that if it didn't work out the first time, it's easy to try to put one blanket statement onto it, but you got to think about like what actually failed you. Was it your application? Like, did you not get accepted to have an interview or even a secondary from some schools, or did you have the interview but then you got rejected or waitlisted? And you can kind of try to fine tune exactly what parts of your app of yourself as an applicant could use some improvement. And for me, it was a lot of I only got like one or so interview invites. And so I'm like, all right, there has to be something on paper that is turning these schools away from me. And so I try to I couldn't really change many of the activities I had besides just more experiences. So a lot of that just fell down to like the essay. And I changed drastically what I wrote about. And I can go into the details of that, but ultimately it was more of just like a story pretty much of intertwining and my experiences to like display that I have these qualities and characteristics that would be ideal in a medical student without blatantly just saying it straight up like I might have been the first time. So like again, like maturity and just more poise in my writing, I'd say.
For sure. I think that's one of the biggest things, like you've already mentioned, is like you really have to articulate your point, but in like a like very short and like meaningful experience that will captivate the reader. Like that's all you just need someone to hang on to your essay for more than that 30 seconds, like initial sentences. If they bite, then you have a really good shot that you'll actually get into medical school or at least get an interview.
Yeah,
So it sounds like you've obviously made those, self improvements and adjustments, and it worked out well for you.
yeah.
And that's awesome, man. So at this point, too, you mentioned that you're at osteopathic medical school. So just for our listeners who might not be too familiar, what goes into, I guess, like how is the osteopathic education system a little bit different than the MD pathway or allopathic? Just from when it comes to like maybe a curriculum.
Sure. Yeah. So in terms of the curriculum, there really doesn't seem to be a whole lot of difference for the most part. Just from having spoken with some of my friends and peers that are at the allopathic schools, the MDs, it seems like the general systems classes, the foundational basic sciences, all of those are really not any different. Perhaps the way they organize them and like structure them and all that, and like the way they examine could be slightly different, but it seems to be different in that way just about every single school. So all of that seems to be the same. Even in terms of the credit hours and like how much you're actually spending on each of those doesn't seem to be a whole lot different. But then we have to take osteopathic principles and practice. It's called OPP, and that's both a lecture and a lab. And for the most part, I mean, it's pretty interesting. It's a lot more laid back than a lot of the other classes seem to be. A lot more personable, and it's just spoken by these osteopathic physicians that oftentimes have their own private practices where they perform the osteopathic manipulations and what have you. And they share their firsthand experiences. They talk a lot more about the underlying principles behind osteopathy, and then they get into some of the specifics that we then apply later in lab.
Interesting. And so is that a course that you only take in your first year, or is it something that you take throughout all of medical school?
Yeah, it's throughout. There's about five semesters of it or so. I don't know the specifics of like when I'm going to be done, but I know that the second year students are still doing it, so I'm assuming it's at least the 2 of the 4 years, and then we perhaps continue on with a rotation in OPP. So I don't really know as farther down, but I know for now that it is a pretty significant class of the education.
For sure. And does like I know if my memory serves me correctly, because I also applied to NOVA Southeastern. It's kind of I was telling you off the mic ahead of time that this kind of full circle in the sense that I had an acceptance at NOVA, and it just kind of like makes me nostalgic, like going back to that like decision of like making those two distinctions of where to go. I ultimately ended up going to Buffalo because it's closer to home. And it's just kind of interesting to think like how different my life could have been, because
Right.
it's a lot warmer down there for sure. But also what I was getting at is that they're like osteopathic medicine kind of embodies this like holistic approach to like their applicants. So what does that mean exactly?
Well, going into it, I really had no idea. I it could have been a cope, but I was like, you know what? I think I vibe with that more than I would have at an MD school. So I've always been kind of in that mindset of like, of course, I don't want to just only think about the body from a physical perspective. Like, of course, there's like placebo and all these mental different components to it. And then I started getting more into like the spiritual side of things, but for the most part, they don't really dwell on that too much in the education. A lot of it is, yes, understanding that the patient has all of these socioeconomic statuses that are affecting their health and what actually brought them into the clinic in the first place. And like there's a lot that goes into the patient and why they're presenting to you. And you may be able to just get away with prescribing a medication or performing a surgery on them, but you're perhaps not really fixing the root cause of what's actually causing them to be complaining in the first place. So I think that we try to keep it as, yes, there's a lot of value in just treating the problem, but there's a whole lot of other layers that brings the patient to where they're at. And I haven't really learned all the layers and how that really comes into play with actually treating, as I'm still just a first year student learning the basics. But that's a perspective that each of the professors have, whether they're teaching anatomy or pathology or what have you. It's really more than just the osteopathic class itself.
Awesome, man. Definitely a good definition right there for sure. And so now you're, like you mentioned, you're a first year student at this point. And so what's medical school been like for you so far?
It's been a lot of learning, a lot of
Yeah,
like
deep
not just
breath.
learning in, yeah, not a lot of learning just in classes though. It's a lot of just learning about myself to some degree, and even like meta learning, like how do I best learn? And that's a question I tried figuring out the answer to before I started school, but I knew and I was actually correct in thinking that there really is nothing I can like really do to prepare myself other than just kind of starting trying to drink the water from the fire hose and uh, really like the tests themselves haven't been too incredibly difficult. Like actually academically speaking, it's been relatively fine. It's more so just like how what is like my bar of like how much am I happy with? Am I happy with just getting a C and like get the degree? Or am I really trying to like actually become the best doctor I can possibly be? And does doing well in classes really even equate to being the best doctor I can be? So it's a lot of like these kind of questions that part of me doesn't even have time to really think about them because like there's just so much to do. But it's something that's in the back of my mind. Like if I'm putting in like however many hours a week or a day learning all these classes and this material and trying not to forget it, then I want to be as efficient and effective as possible. And so now on spring break and like this is the time where I'm putting a lot of like effort on like how can I kind of tweak my like routines and workflows so that my trajectory moving forward until the next break is as optimal as possible. So definitely haven't gotten there yet, but it's been just a lot of trial and error and finding what works, getting by, and then of course every class is different. Every professor that teaches each class is different, so like it changes by the day and by the week. But just a whole lot of learning, I'd say.
For sure, yeah, and you brought up some good points there, where it certainly is difficult at times. Like you were saying, you don't have time to think about how you're thinking. You're getting like just slammed with all these assignments and projects and things you have to get done. All the material that you're expected to learn, and so sometimes like having these breaks, like you're saying, to kind of just like reflect on everything that you've kind of been through, what's worked, what hasn't worked, is going to set you up and give you the momentum to tackle the tasks that are still ahead of you. So I think that's really insightful that you're able to do that right now. And you kind of mentioned like the meta of learning how to learn. And
Mhm.
there, what I've come across too in my experience is like there's nothing like everyone's got a different way.
Yeah.
And you could sample every single person in that medical school room, and all of them will have a different approach, slightly different, tweaked here and there. So I think that's the biggest realization for anyone who's going to medical school is not being flustered about choosing the right path. You have to figure out what's going to work best for you. Take a little bit from every one of those people and figure out how to make your own style.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, but then I think about it like I was, let's say, a big fan of playing tennis, and I would learn by playing tennis, and like I wouldn't be doing these drills, like hitting the serves and all of that. Like I would just have a friend that was at a similar level than me, and we'd be like playing each other, and like we would take like a good amount of time to really learn how to play tennis, but over time, just by actually playing, you'd be hitting all of our weak points and actually strengthening ourselves like holistically. And so that's kind of where my mindset is shifting away from perhaps like doing Anki all the time and more so in just throwing practice questions at myself. I mean, we have all this artificial intelligence and question banks that can generate as many questions as we really see fit. And so perhaps like just testing ourselves is the best way of going about it. But I don't know. That's kind of where my mind's at right now, but it's definitely TBD.
For sure. And so you've taken some courses already, obviously. Have you taken anatomy yet? And what was that like?
Yeah, anatomy was like the first class that we were taking back in July, and that was like the whole semester. So that was from like July to winter time, and
Hmm.
it was interesting. I it was like split up between like 5 or 6 different units within it, and it was definitely a lot of content. Not gonna lie, it helped me understand where some of my more like natural interests were. Like for example, perhaps like the abdomen. I either like loved it or I didn't like it compared to like the cranial areas, and so like I just found out that like I was definitely gravitating towards certain units more than others, but regardless, I mean, it is such a conceptual class that you can't really, or I didn't at least, like find joy in just trying to memorize like muscle insertions and innervations and all of that. So you really have to kind of like think about it all from perhaps like a third dimension, and that's something I actually quite enjoy the visualization aspect. And luckily, my professor was a surgeon, and he said like that's a huge part of even being a surgeon. So it opened my eyes to surgery, but only to the slightest degree. So overall, I mean, I thought it was a worthwhile class. I'm glad I'm done with it, but it's definitely not going anywhere in terms of just the knowledge itself.
Yeah, I think everyone who gets through anatomy is like, I'm going to be the next cardiothoracic pediatric neurosurgeon. And,
Right.
I was certainly one of those people too. It's like, oh, maybe I do like this. I made it through anatomy and this stuff is really cool. But then as you kind of add in those other factors down the road, it wasn't a pathway for me. And so, yeah, anatomy is definitely a beast of a class, but it's also, I think like first year in general is a very formative year for students where you're getting kind of adjusted to the workflow, but you're also seeing a lot of things that like you do like, you don't like from the textbook side of things, where,
Hmm.
like I really like this material. However, the next step is obviously getting to that third year clerkships. And then now you're seeing it in application. And, you'll see sometimes those two things don't actually line up as intended.
Well, yeah.
Like I certainly loved renal in my didactic years. That's you take that second year, at least I
Yeah.
did at my curriculum. And oh my goodness, I could never do that as a profession.
Yeah, right. I mean, I find myself actually, like you said, for renal. I mean, we haven't taken the full class, but we learned a bit about it in physiology, and I started going to my mother, she was an ICU nurse, and I'd be like, I think I'm interested in nephrology, and she'd be like, you want to do dialysis, all this and all that. I'm like, I don't even know what that even means yet. So like, I'm hesitant to really say anything at this point to anyone because like things change so fast and like interests come and go, and I really am just getting like a small scope of everything, but I'm sure that
Mhm.
experience will come.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, the average med student changes like 5, 6 times on like what they want to do. There are, of course, those, some people, and I'm sure you have them in your class who like day one knew like I'm going to be, an orthopedic surgeon. We have all those people too, of course.
Yeah.
But, I think it's starting to be more rare in the sense. So don't be stressed about that. If you're listening in too, and you're thinking, oh, I don't know yet. And so kind of building off that, what are you most excited for looking forward to like medical school? We kind of prefaced it already, but
I I mean, part of me is really interested in, of course, is learning about what is involved in like the care for patients, especially those that are admitted, and because that's not really an experience I've truly had before, since I've only had experience in, like the emergency department and like these private practice outpatient settings. So I look forward to that, but also just having more of like an actual understanding about why things are happening. That was something I've never really had since I started my medical school experience, and I'm just beginning to really get a glimpse of what is involved and why certain steps are the way they are, why certain things are ordered and what have you. So just having a better understanding and even trying to become a part of the delivery of care to patients is something I'm looking forward to. But on top of that, just the innovation that's happening. I think that there's so much tools that are being developed and services that are offered using innovative technology that is trying to make life easier for the physicians and those that are in the path of care. I'm more so focused on just learning what the baseline is and then trying to augment it from there. But it's something that I'm keeping my mind open to.
of course. And, I know we kind of talked about it too already, but like if you had to choose a specialty right now, what would it be and why?
Well, mentally, I'm trying to go for something that's at my natural interests, which with a background in neuro, I'm interested in neurology or neurosurgery. But like I
Hmm.
said before, I mean, I don't even know what it's involved in cutting into like a human body. Like I've never done that before, and I don't plan to have any OR experience probably until my third and fourth year. So in my mindset, I'm trying to like almost grind as if I'm going to be applying to neurosurgery, as like that's one of the more competitive ones. And
Hmm.
if I go for family medicine, then perhaps I'd be a strong applicant for that specialty, even though I was preparing for neurosurgery. So overall, I mean, I'm not really like set in stone for any one particular way. I'm naturally interested in the neuro side of things, and I'm kind of using that as like an anchor to do research that's more in like the data analytics. So, for example, if I'm trying to learn about like a machine learning application in healthcare, doing that in all of healthcare is a huge undertaking, but doing that within neurosurgery is a smaller undertaking. So I can learn the general principles. I can perhaps get a paper written out of it and something to my name, but I don't have to do it in like the all encompassing. I can kind of just choose one specialty. So that's the specialty I've been choosing. And I have some connections and professors from my past that either are on the track to becoming neurosurgeons or retired neurosurgeons. So I definitely don't even know what they really do on a day to day, to be completely honest with you. But I like it at a conceptual or theoretical level, and so that's kind of what I'm jumping on for now.
Absolutely. And I think that's a really good idea just for like anyone who's also like pursuing medical school and or is in medical school at this point is you have this philosophy that you're going to even if you're not entirely sure that you want to go down the neurosurgery route, you're thinking that. But, just having this like go, go, go attitude and being proactive about what you're going to get done in these first couple of years is really, really important. Because there's a lot of like, being a fourth year right now, I think a lot of people have gotten to the point where like they were wanting to switch into different specialties and they couldn't necessarily do so because they weren't necessarily competitive. They didn't work on some of those research projects or find opportunities in that particular field. And so, that's something I think, or they wish they had been more competitive, because they thought, oh, I wanted to do, something less competitive up front. But now it turns out you get the third year, you're doing that and you realize, oh, I don't like this at all. So I think you have a really good mindset about that and it's going to serve you well in the future.
Yeah, I guess we'll see. Yeah. No, I mean, the mindset is like just try to be as competitive as possible. I mean, my ultimate goal is just to not have to be limited in like the decision I make. Like, I would love if I'm really passionate about a certain specialty, that the door is open for me to actually pursue that for the rest of my life. I don't really want to be limited like perhaps I was in getting into a certain school, from pre med to medical school. Like, I really want to just grind, try to get that 528 in this sense of what I'm doing now, and then just have the ability to be competitive just about anywhere I'm trying to go. But again, that's a dream, that's a goal, but it is difficult to turn that goal into reality. But I mean, it's an effort that's undertaking every single day.
Fantastic. And so transitioning to like our next segment right now, I know you have interests in like business and startup. And, my initial question is going to be, what do you think was the initial spark that kind of prompted you to have like this dual interest?
Yeah, so this goes back to when I was in undergrad, like third or fourth year. This was right when COVID was beginning, and I was preparing for the MCAT. And I was, even to take a step back from there, I found a lot of success in like my time, like my middle years of undergrad, of starting to use Anki. And once I began like getting the grades that were reflective of like the effort I was putting in, I just kind of jumped on that, and I knew that for the MCAT, I'm going to be relying on Anki for a big part of my preparation. And I still was like very new to like the world of Anki and all this like test prep and all that. So I just started making my own flashcards, and I would just go by subject by subject. I would start sharing them on different Facebook groups and on Reddit, and people began asking for more updates to them. As I was making cards every single day, and people were like doing them, and they found great value in them, and that grew a community of sorts. And so I continued to just find myself spending more and more time making the flashcards just for the sake of trying to create the best flashcards possible. And it could have again been like a coping mechanism to actually avoid like the rigor of what I was actually trying to learn. But overall, I mean, I started drifting away from just trying to excel in my test scores, and more so just deliver the best kind of product I can possibly give. And that really kind of manifested in like the month before my actual tests date. I I really wanted to create a service that was a bit better than what was currently available. And so to expand upon that, something I found value in throughout the months of my preparation was with these like daily questions that were sent out via email that Kaplan would offer, or just one of these kind of basic companies. And they would just send one question out per day straight to your inbox. You'd answer it and you get it right or wrong. And oftentimes, let's say I got it wrong, then I would be like, well, how am I going to be certain that I'm not going to get this wrong tomorrow or like later today or on the day of my test? And so I wanted to use Anki to help reiterate upon those problems that were missed. And so I ultimately just used my deck. I reached out to all the other like Anki decks that were very popular at the time, and I just spoke with the owners, asked them, "Hey, I'm trying to create this free service. Anyone can subscribe to this email list. I'll manually send out the emails every single day in like a multiple choice format, just one question, and I'll include a download link for Anki that incorporates your cards, my cards, whatever cards are actually related to that topic, so that people like can get it wrong, they can download the cards and start doing them daily." So that was the idea, and I made one TikTok video, and it got like 70,000 videos or views at the time, and people were like asking for me to share the link to join all of that, and overnight there's thousands of people that were signed up to this service, and I had no idea of like if I could make money from this. That really wasn't my mindset whatsoever. It was more so like just a fun experiment to like try to provide value in innovative ways. And from there, that definitely like lit a spark in me of like I want to be doing this more often, of like combining what I'm naturally grinding towards and interested in, which was like the medical side, but also apply the technology to it to make it more accessible to others and actually valuable. So that's what started everything, and I haven't really looked back since.
Yeah, that's really cool. And I really like the point that you just mentioned where you reference the fact that you weren't focused on just making money through this. I think that's where a lot of like startup individuals kind of fail. Of course, you need to have like sound financials if you're like starting a business per se, but like your motivation was not to like, retire off of this. You wanted to provide value to your users. And I think a lot of people will authentically just like gravitate towards that kind of service that you offer because like you're not trying to like be some salesman about it or anything like that. Like you're
Yeah.
providing intrinsic value to them. And I think people are very appreciative, especially in the medical field, when you make like something as difficult as the MCAT or whatever they're studying for that much simpler. It means a lot and it can impact a lot of people. So it's really cool that you were able to do that. And
Yeah.
so, with that in mind, where is this like particular, what's the name of this business that you kind of started? Is it like MCAT's Prep Start or?
Yeah, so back then it was just MCAT daily prep. I learned a lot about the ins and outs of just what not to do, pretty much. Like for example, just to quickly give an example, I one of my old friends, if you will, he was like, "Bro, I see what you're doing. Like, I'd love to make get involved to some degree." I'm like, "All right, well, I could use like a logo for like my profile picture on TikTok and like for the website." And he ultimately like made this logo that was like one to one identical to like another MCAT service, and I had no idea. I didn't really know the competitors at the time, and so I got like a cease and desist letter and like the legal threat of we're gonna sue you like pretty quick. And I didn't have like an LLC or anything, so like I learned very quickly like this is a shark infested waters, if you will. Like this is not something to really just play around with. But I mean, it was a learning experience. Nothing really bad came of it. It was just kind of shocked me into like, all right, this is actually like a real world where I'm like the consequences are no longer like, oh, I got to be on this exam. It's all right. I'll just prepare for the next one. Like there's actual like more at stake for the business side of things.
Yeah, it's funny you bring that up too. Like just like talking about like, oh, something as simple as making a logo. And I say simple because I did the same thing back then, not for, not like any kind of cease and desist, but I paid someone to like make a Canva version of my book cover for and I could do that in like 3 minutes right now. And I paid
Yeah,
this guy like $70 to do it. I can't believe that.
yeah,
So
right.
it's just kind of funny what we know, like in hindsight. It's just like, wow,
Yeah,
it definitely, I guess if you look back and you don't laugh, then that means you haven't really learned anything and you haven't grown
amen to that.
for sure. And so, that's your MCAT daily prep. So is that currently like because of like the kind of things that occurred with that, are you still active in that particular space or?
Well, I hate to say it, but like after I took my actual MCAT, I was so burnt out from all things MCAT. I really just didn't even want to send out a daily question. But I had like thousands of subscribers at the time, so I didn't really want to leave them hanging. So I was at the time like getting closer with this man named Raj. He's part of the MCAT Bros. If you're familiar, I'm sure someone
Mhm.
in the audience may know of them. It's a company that's fairly well respected in the space of just helping students prepare for the MCAT. And I thought there's some alignment in terms of the service I can provide and the community that he's built. So I ended up selling the business to them. It wasn't really a revenue generating business, so it wasn't like a high ticket price or anything like that. But it was an
Sure.
experience that helped me understand that all right, there's a successful exit I can make from these business ventures. I don't have to just start it and then have it dwindle away or anything like that. So I sold that pretty soon thereafter.
Yeah, that's really cool. I think that's a problem too with like any kind of like industry like this where we're kind of working in like I do like admissions counseling, but now that I'm on the precipice of starting residency, like I've kind of almost like outgrown this business where,
Mhm.
I don't know if I necessarily want to be doing like, MCAT admissions counseling. I want to talk about residency stuff. I want to talk about patient care.
Oh yeah,
So it's just kind of funny how, reflecting back like how much we've grown over that time period where you don't want to be looking at cars passages and sending out like, every single day to your newsletter. So it's just kind of interesting how that occurs.
yeah,
And so after you sold this business, you kind of created another venture, Varos Technology.
yeah,
Can you tell us a little
yeah.
bit more about
So
that?
yeah, I mean that was similar to what you just mentioned about how like we're constantly evolving ourselves and like what we're doing, and that was pretty much like I closed that chapter of the MCAT, and now in my mindset I'm like, all right, I'm gonna apply to medical school, I'm gonna get accepted, and how am I gonna learn? Because like obviously the MCAT and like Anki it helped me to some degree, but it wasn't really like what I was hoping for. So I'm like, there's got to be something more effective and efficient than simply just reading text on a screen and trying to learn about the human body when like as a physician you're not dealing so much with text on the screen. Like you're kind of conceptualizing your hands-on working with patients. And so I worked with some of my friends that were at other schools, and I ultimately just like discussed some ideas with them. And we came to the idea of like ultimately we wanted to create something that involves again like some kind of innovative technology. And at the time, we settled on virtual and augmented reality, and then organ systems. So that's what VARO stands for, and it's like an acronym. And so we didn't really know what we wanted to do, but I had the idea of like there's got to be something at this intersection of like applying this technology to help with education. And so I threw together a PowerPoint presentation. At the time, I was a graduate from Virginia Tech, but I shared it with like the entrepreneurship club there. I had to lie
Hmm.
and say I was a senior in high school or a senior in college, so they didn't really mind too much. But I got some interest, enough from the members of that club meeting. And after a few days, we had like 10 of us that were like, all right, this is the general area of what we want to build. There's not really any organization to this quite yet. Andrew came up with the idea, but it's pretty much anywhere we want to take this. And so we did a whole lot of just roundabout work. Honestly, not really sure of what to build, just trying different things, trying to build some products, share them at a conference, get some feedback, implement them at my clinic I was working at in the GI center, and just probably like 2 years of just trying different things. And there was no one's really like full-time job. We didn't, it was all bootstrapped, so like it wasn't like there was so much at stake, but we're trying to find product market fit. And I think the biggest issue was that when I did MCAT daily prep, there was already that established, like I was the first user pretty much. Like I was using these email services, and I knew a problem that can be fixed with them, but the same couldn't be said about Baros. And so we ended up settling upon this idea of like there's the FibroScan in my clinic, which involved liver scans, and we really just wanted to turn those like numbers on a paper that were for their scarring and their fat accumulation into something that the patients can actually like visually understand. That was our starting point. And we built, luckily my co-founder Michael, he was amazing with the technology. He was able to build something that didn't require the big goggles for virtual and augmented reality, but something that was accessible on a phone or a computer. And we put it onto our landing page, and we prepared to run a clinical trial to just determine if this innovative technology and this application was truly better than like what was actually currently available as like the industry standard. And that's where we ran into our problem of money. Like running a clinical trial, unfortunately, is like very expensive.
Hmm.
I mean, I had the locations because at the time my practice got bought out by others, and I was very close with like the head of clinical research, and they were all set and like willing to be a part of this clinical trial and like kind of do it for free because they'd be benefiting from it. But then I graduated from, I got accepted to medical school. I had to leave that position, and that's when they're like, all right, well, now if you're going to do it, then we're going to charge you. So it really just ended up going nowhere. Unfortunately, it was an incredibly just educational experience of like running that kind of group. If you want to call it a company, then you can. But really, it was just a hobby for many of us that we were taking it very seriously, but it was just really not a paper, like on paper, a success.
Of course. And, not everything you aspire to is ever going to be like, the full thing that we necessarily envision.
Yeah.
And there's going to be tons of barriers and stuff that come along the way. Like you said, the funding is the hardest part to get. You have to raise like a seed funding and all this stuff, and then it's dilutional, and then you have to kind of give
Yeah.
away, some of your equity in the company. And it's definitely, I think, difficult from a, startup owner's perspective, because like this is your baby, you know what I mean? Like this is everything you
Yeah.
believed and dreamed in and invested all this time into, and now you have to kind of meet these standards that other people are, kind of placing on you. So I can definitely see why that's a challenge too.
Yeah.
um cool. And so after, like you said, this is an educational perspective, you then are creating another product now that is, I think, like, I guess like a little less nebulous in the sense, like from a clinician standpoint, like I can understand and conceptualize what exactly you're trying to do with this, and it's called Schedule Clinic. Is that correct?
Yeah, so we're taking another swing at things. But yeah, I mean, I think honestly, I just have that entrepreneurial spirit in me that really just, despite that the experience with Varos, like it hasn't really been diminished to some degree. I mean, of course, most of my focus is on school. I'd say like 99% of my focus is, but I have enough of that 1% to make something work. And so, one of my classmates and I, like, we really just talk about this in our free time. And he's more of the programming, like technical background kind of person, and I'm not. And then one of my old colleagues, one of the physicians at that GI practice, he was one of like the hip young physicians that was just out of his fellowship, and he was always talking to me about this technology that's coming out and all of this and all that. And so ultimately, us three just started a group chat and just started talking just about weekly, just how things are going. And ultimately, we all kind of settled upon the idea that there's a lot of room for disruption in healthcare, but a lot of that takes a lot of effort, like I experienced with Varos. And
Hmm.
so, what is the easiest possible thing that we can all try to build and like actively learn about that can get our foot in the door of actually getting a product to turn into a business? And we settled upon this idea of like the cancellations. And so, just to give a quick background, I mean, just working in GI, patients would cancel for their procedures for a colonoscopy, and most of the time, all the procedure coordinators would do was just take the very last patient on the list and bring them on up so that it's a smooth day. Like no one wants to be really sitting around waiting, but then you're missing out on that last gap, like that last open slot at the end of the day, and so that's money left on the table. And so all we really did was just make a simple automated SMS messaging service that is just kind of basic. It's not really using any like fancy artificial intelligence or anything like that. It just gets the job done. And so we're beta testing in the clinic that I used to work at, just getting patients to scan the QR code like they would at a restaurant, join the wait list, share their availability. If there's a cancellation, then we'll send out a message to them. It's first come, first serve. Whoever reserves the spot, they get the spot. They'll confirm over the phone, and simple and easy. And so we're finding some good success, some good metrics there that I'm looking to now spread into a clinic in my area down here in Florida, just to get like some confirmation that this isn't just like a one-off success that we're having in Virginia. So I'm in the process of doing that, and I'm finding my own challenges and difficulties of doing that. But again, like this isn't taking up all of my time in the world. I think there's something here for at least the near-term future. I don't know if this is a business that's going to be in existence in 10 years when these EMRs probably keep expanding in their capabilities, but it's something to keep us busy and hopefully drive some revenue for the time being, because medical school is not cheap by any means, and so anything helps. But that's definitely not the focus. It's just trying to provide value. But yeah, that's kind of what we're working on now.
Yeah, and I think you have like a really interesting market there too, because that's something that a lot of physicians, that's a major pain point for a lot of their private practices, where we get a cancellation and you have to reschedule the surgery, or like you said, this missing spot. That's thousands and thousands of dollars, kind of left on the
Yeah,
table. Not to mention that opportunity could have gone to someone who obviously, some patients are waiting months and months
yeah,
just to get in for these appointments, and they're sitting there like in discomfort, and like there's a lot of morbidity associated with some of these procedures that are delayed. And so you're kind of like addressing both the physician's pain point as well as like the patients are probably happy like that they are able to be seen sooner instead of having to do these like 6 month waiting periods. So I
yeah,
think it's a really interesting product that you're trying to push out there. And like I've talked to a lot of different startup owners and creators on this podcast, and the top recommendation is find the easiest possible thing and just do that instead.
yeah,
We have all these big ambitions to create like these really complex ideas. Maybe Varos Technologies is something that was, something
yeah,
that was very complex from your perspective. Like I certainly have things on my end, and like I look back and I think to myself, like I just got to focus on this one thing that's the
yeah,
easiest path of resistance and go there.
yeah,
And you'll get so much farther instead of trying to like beat your head against the wall.
yeah.
So I think
Well,
that's really cool that you're working on this.
yeah, I mean, there's enough challenge elsewhere, like marketing, for example, like actually going to talk to these GI practices, and then they say they're part of a bigger conglomerate, like my clinic was, and they give some hassle and some bureaucracy in there. So like, there's enough complication with actually trying to get customers that you don't need to add all those layers to complication for the product itself. So yeah, again, like plenty of lessons learned from all of this. I don't think anything was really a waste of my time. But I mean, it's just hopefully as long as I can actually apply those lessons learned and actually like not have to experience them again, I think that's probably for the best.
Of course, yeah. The mistakes that were made with your prior companies are things you're not going to make again on this run, and so every product in the future is going to be a little bit better. So I think that's awesome. And so, kind of talking about this final philosophical question, I saw that you recently posted a interesting systemic review article titled "Transcending Fear: The Power of Mindful Affirmations and Purposeful Action." So, what are the major takeaways healthcare professionals can learn from this piece?
Well, before I even go into like the details of like what I wrote about, I think just overall just having a hobby of actually trying to learn is interesting enough. I mean, yes, we're paying money in tuition to learn from these classes, but they're like everyone always touts like, oh, you got to be a lifelong learner. I do think there is some value to that. And so for personally, I mean, whether it's like these research papers on like some innovative technology or discovery, or even it's more like these spiritual writings that have been written about decades ago. For me, I just like to read, like, kind of go down the rabbit hole And then I go out into nature, either on like a bike ride or walking around, and I just have like some kind of transcription service, just like I'm just kind of bringing those thoughts up to the surface and kind of getting them into writing without having to like manually sit there and type it or like write it by hand. And then from there, I just kind of have some edits made and some revisions to that, to whatever I was speaking about. And then I just try to turn that into like a paper and submit it somewhere if there's interest, or I try to get it, a PI onto it if it's like more academic and I feel like there's something to go down that route for. So, for example, like this one on the embracing fear. I mean, I was just reading a lot during my gap years, in my free time, and making blog posts and just watching YouTube videos all about these different, like just living in the moment and trying to not really harness myself onto like fear, doubt, or indecision, and letting any of that kind of just cause me to do anything besides just immediate and persistent action. So I have a lot of like citations from different books and different readings. And I'm personally not a big book reader myself. I was a lot of just like listening to different things, but I cite them nonetheless. And I think it was just a way for me to kind of bring these thoughts to the surface so that I can live them and also share them with others. I don't know if a single person read it, honestly, but it was, as long as I am doing this for myself, I'm hopeful that others will gain some value from it as well.
For sure. I think like being mindful of those particular things is really helpful. Like kind of like you said, bringing those ideas to the surface can go a long way with like kind of just living a fulfilling life in general. You know, if there's things that you think are missing because of school or like your responsibilities, like you need to stay grounded and kind of do that introspection to see like what is missing, what do I find value in? How can I also then, you know, some people find value by providing value to other people. And so it sounds like that's something that you also, you know,
Mm-hmm.
strive to do yourself.
Well, that is the last thing I'll say is like, yeah, I mean, it's important to find something like that to keep us grounded, especially if your audience is more so in like the medical side of things. Like, it is a grind, and like it's easy to kind of say like, I'm gonna just devote myself 100% to school and maybe watch Netflix in my spare time. And I mean, you really just kind of be mindful and like, if is that really scratching all the needs that you have? I mean, to give some quick example, I mean, I was speaking with one of my old professors who was a neurosurgeon, and he just shared like this insight that helped me a lot, especially trying to like juggle maintaining a healthy relationship with my partner and then having family ties and friendships that are still maintained and all of that. Just like make it like a bar graph pretty much, where like the x-axis is like all these different areas of your life, whether it's like spiritual, mental, physical, etc., and then the y-axis just like on a scale of like 0 to 10, just rate everything, and then just watch that how that changes over time, like either daily or weekly or monthly. Just like regrade yourself, and you'll see just kind of visually, perhaps like I'm putting zero effort in terms of like keeping my friendships maintained, and 100% of my effort towards school, or zero effort on spiritual things. And so whatever it may be, just I think just keeping that away from just, I don't know, just not devoting yourself wholeheartedly to one thing and neglecting everything else is important.
Yeah, there's that famous saying that, you know, if you don't measure it, then you're not going to be able to change it. So, you know,
Yeah.
if you're keeping track of all that stuff, then you're going to stay balanced and you'll have kind of proof to say like, oh, last month I definitely was not balanced.
Yeah, 100%.
Awesome, man. So we're ready for our famous three questions. And these are the same questions we ask every individual who comes on the podcast.
Okay.
And so we'll start out with question number one. How do you maintain a work-life balance in your demanding profession? And do you have any tips or recommendations for others who are trying to achieve this same balance?
I will say that I started school. I was down here by myself. I had a long-term relationship that was, like long distance at the time, and that was challenging. It was doable for me, less so for like a healthy relationship. And so a few months ago, I moved my partner down, and we've been here together. And my partner is not in the medical field, not in higher education whatsoever. So it really is like two different worlds trying to make it work. And I think there's still a lot to learn in that degree, but it really just is, being open to how others are feeling and adapting as you go. I mean, for me, my main focus is trying to become a doctor and also have a family in the near future. But I can't just give myself wholeheartedly 100% to one or the other. And so I have to be fairly open and honest about, hey, I have a lot going on this day. I'm not going to be able to do X, Y, and Z with you, but perhaps I'm off on this day. I can go do it on that day. Just kind of like, again, like it's a daily learning experience, and like everyone has to kind of find that common ground in terms of their expectations, but just being open and honest with others for when you're dealing it with multiple people. But for myself, I mean, just finding time to like go on a bike ride or go on a walk or down here go to the beach. It's not frequent, it's not often whatsoever, maybe not even monthly, but whenever I do have time to go, just devote myself 100%. And even if I'm spending time with my partner, like I just give them my 100% focus, not really thinking about school. And again, that's easier said than done, but it's something that is very important because that time is important and you got to put it somewhere. So you might as well be physically present and mentally present for whatever you're doing. So that's my suggestion for that.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice too. It's like compartmentalizing the two different things. Like I think that's something that your experience is very common with, having partners who are non-medical who don't understand like kind of what it's like to be in the trenches per se, but it's all
Yeah.
about communication and whatnot. But also like I'm saying compartmentalizing and saying, the dissatisfaction that you experience like with medical school is going to amplify if you are blending and crossing the two and
Yeah.
vice versa in your relationship outside. So I think it's important, like you're saying, and you're doing a great job with it, where you're kind of separating those two fields,
Yeah.
and
And
being
like,
100% present.
oh yeah. Yeah. And like I've come to terms with like, let's say if I only focus on school, then I'll get 100% on the exams. But am I comfortable with getting a 90% and giving some of that extra time towards the relationship, the family, and everything else? I mean, that's a trade off that everyone has to come to terms with if they want to even make that trade off to begin with. And for me personally, just given my life where I'm at now, that's a trade off I'm willing to go with. And I'm still going to grind like my will to do as well as I can on the exam, but I can't neglect everything else at this point. I don't, nor do I have like the real desire to. But things are gonna get tricky when it comes to residencies, and I'm actually like not just here studying in my room pretty much all the day, like the whole day. I'm actually going somewhere, waking up early, and things will change. But again, just kind of communicating with that with those that have a vested interest in your time.
Of course. Alrighty. So question number 2. Do you have any last minute recommendations to students or graduates who are interested in pursuing a career similar to your own?
Well, my biggest concern that I'm sure that other people are feeling as well is like what's going to change in terms of the actual careers that we're on the trajectory of becoming a part of. So, for example, I mean, there's so much technology that's releasing and it's replacing manual work by the day. I'm not going to say everything is like drastically changing overnight, but there's changes that are inevitable, and I think that's for the best. Best for the patients, best for pretty much everyone. Ideally, I mean, I don't know if everyone wants to be. Regardless, I mean, I think that there's changes that are inevitable, and there's a lot of confusion and fear looming because of that. And the way I see it is the best way of preparing ourselves, no matter what happens, is just getting to the forefront of what's happening. I mean, I can't perhaps go and become the world famous machine learning expert because I have other commitments, but I can start carving my own path and perhaps being at the intersection of two disparate paths that are novel. And so I think just honestly, just doing whatever you're truly interested in, you're passionate about, something that is actually valued by others, and it can help make you some money. Whatever that is, you don't have to figure it out today or tomorrow, but just constantly course correct and affirm that to be true, and eventually you may end up exactly where you're meant to be.
Alrighty. And now it's time for our third question. What are your personal, professional, or business oriented goals you'd like to accomplish in the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, I'd love to have financial freedom. I think that's kind of my number one focus. I think a lot of other chips will fall into place when that's achievable. A lot of stress will be relieved in different areas of my life, but it's not my sole focus, not my sole grind. It's something that's on my mind, just slowly building towards that. And that could be why I'm grinding so hard on trying to get into a certain residency or what have you. But ultimately, I think financial freedom is something that people don't really mention a lot or don't talk about, especially in our paths. It's very achievable for people, but it takes a lot of time. And so that's something that's on my mind. I don't really try to shy away from that. I'm not only here to make money, of course, but it is something that's a goal of mine. So that's one of them. I would love to continue having just an amazing relationship with my partner. Plan to propose in the near future.
Oh, that's
um,
exciting.
yeah, right. My
Yeah, I
my
just got
family.
engaged too.
Yeah, right. I'm sure we can talk offline about that. I have a lot of questions, and I'm sure you have a lot of insight and experience. But yeah, I'm just continue living as best as I can for others, and of course myself as well. But really, just trying to do what I can because I'm on a grind that's going to take a foreseeable part of my life. And if I devote myself wholeheartedly to just that, then I'm going to be suffering elsewhere, and I don't want that to be the case. So beside that, just honestly, just trying to be the best version of myself and recognize that when I'm falling astray, be open to critique and feedback that I'm acting out of line and continually find like where that line really should be. And yeah, I mean, I can go deep into like the spiritual side of things, but really just taking care of myself in all ways and trying to be the best person I can for those that matter.
Excellent. Alrighty, well, we've come to the end of our interview today, and I'd like to thank all of our listeners for the support. If you have any additional questions about the medical school journey, check out my website at www.physicianpharmacist.com. Before we let you go, Andrew, how can our listeners get in touch with you or learn more about you?
I'd say LinkedIn, easy way to connect with me. We'll talk it out in the DMs. We can go from there. But I'm not really trying to be too present on social medias beyond that. I probably spend too much time on LinkedIn, just kind of perusing. But yeah, that's probably where I'm most active for now.
Awesome. And so we'll link that down below. Well, thanks again, Andrew, for being on the podcast today. I really do appreciate your time. I know first year is very busy, but I think we had a lot of really interesting things to talk about today.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here. Perhaps I can come back my fourth year and see where things are at.
I love it. All right. Sounds good, man. Take it easy.
All right, likewise.